Hi, I'm Donald McIntyre, founder of Etherplan. I research, write articles, and podcasts about Ethereum Classic, Bitcoin, and decentralized applications. This series is Getting Started with Ethereum Classic, section Philosophy. The article I'm going to read is Ethereum Classic and the Permissionless Fallacy. This is episode 9 of 50. Ethereum Classic and the Permissionless Fallacy. Recently, Ethereum Classic (ETC) has been going through several crises and controversies. Some of those involve the kind of circular problems that Nicholas Taleb mentioned in his article, The Most Intolerant Wins: The Dictatorship of the Small Minority, where he wrote the following rhetorical questions. Would you agree to deny the freedom of speech to every political party that has in its charter the banning of freedom of speech? Should a society that has elected to be tolerant be intolerant about intolerance? As the above freedom of speech and tolerance dilemmas, in the blockchain industry there are similar dilemmas, one of which is related to permissionlessness. To illustrate it, an analogous rhetorical question when referring to permissionlessness would be something like, if a blockchain is permissionless, should participants have permission to do things that undermine permissionlessness? My answer to the above questions is the same one I use to object to people when they say free markets means no rules or the law of the jungle. That is not true. The truth is to the contrary. Free markets are free because they are dependent on very strict rules that have to be followed and enforced. For example, free markets depend on strong property laws, contract laws, in some cases specific times and places where transactions have to be conducted, settled, and in what form, information transparency rules, and the thorough enforcement of these and other systems. In the same way, freedom of speech, tolerance, and permissionlessness are strict rules, sometimes encoded in constitutions, the law, or culturally ingrained in social norms that have to be thoroughly enforced and actively defended. This is how I define the permissionless fallacy in the blockchain space in general. Because a blockchain is permissionless, that means that anything can be done, even if it undermines permissionlessness. However, the correct argument is, because blockchains are permissionless, anything that undermines permissionlessness must be stopped. Of course, the permissionless fallacy is presented in not so direct, but much more subtle forms and flavors in real life. Some cases in ETC. In Ethereum Classic in particular, it has been argued that requesting to be an admin in the community repo on GitHub and then removing all other admins is okay because it was permitted in the GitHub terms of service. More recently, a developer team decided to fork the Community Ethereum Classic Improvement Proposal Process, ECIP, because ETC software is open source and in the open source industry, forking is a social norm. Therefore, forking the ECIP process is perfectly fine. In the last few days, another member of the community was refloating the idea of creating a foundation or several foundations because they can have tax advantages which motivate people to donate money for development, thus potentially solving the lack of financing for such important activities in ETC. All of the above are different forms of the permissionless fallacy. The fact that an admin can revoke other admins, that anything can be forked in the open source software industry, and that anyone can form a foundation if they want to, does not mean that it is perfectly fine to do all those things, even if they have ancillary benefits, if they undermine permissionlessness. The question is, how are permissionless fallacies resolved? Whether the underlying action is good or bad, right or wrong, popular or controversial, or beneficial or catastrophic, permissionlessness does create an environment of freedom that makes it difficult to overcome permissionless fallacies. In my experience, in the blockchain industry, it seems the situation depends on two dimensions: severity and ecosystem size. For example, if some developer teams are building bridges, wrappers, or doing some collaborations with the teams of other chains which have no interest in benefiting ETC, but those activities benefit the other chain in the form of signaling in the context of a standards war, but not ETC, that would not be as severe as integrating into a mainstream client, bypassing the improvement proposal process, a new arbitrary change in the monetary policy which significantly undermines the immutability guarantees of the network and significantly changes economic incentives, while somehow convincing miners and node operators into deploying it. On the other hand, when a blockchain is small, as ETC is, with a growing but still not sizable ecosystem, it is much easier to capture some community resources under the cover of permissionless fallacies than in a huge network as Bitcoin worth tens of billions of dollars, which has many participants, including a large developer base, enormous hashing power, and economically large full node operators in many regions of the world. This is because in a large ecosystem, it is either much easier for the natural forces of the social layer to prevent undesirable actions, or such actions are so insignificant relative to the size of the ecosystem that it doesn't matter anyway. Conclusion: moving forward in ETC. As to a couple of the particular events and permissionless fallacies mentioned in this post that have presented themselves in the last few months in ETC, I think it is unlikely CryCoder will ever return the GitHub organization and restore the previous admins. Similarly, and for different reasons, it is unlikely that the officials or developers of the company will ever give a reasonable explanation for that action. I think at this point the community must move on. However, it is very plausible that a unified yet decentralized ECIP process will emerge from the recent GitHub admin and improvement proposal controversies. This could even be a net positive for ETC because the CryCoder actions may have led to a more advanced and decentralized improvement proposal process, which will be more advanced and adapted to secure blockchain consensus changes than the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal Process, BIP, and the Ethereum Improvement Proposal Process, EIP. Nevertheless, that a bad actor may have contributed in a perverse way to a positive change in the ecosystem does not mean that that bad actor is not such. This means that ETC must continue to remain vigilant and always defend itself as best as possible from permissionless fallacies. Secure proof-of-work public blockchains are and will always be under constant social attack.